A new era of Alabama football begins this season, helping us break down the Crimson Tide in 2024. Our good friend Alex Scarborough of Bama247. He joins the show once again. Alex, what's going on, my friend? Appreciate you taking the time.
How you doing? Everything's going well over here.
Absolutely. So again, like I mentioned, a new era, Alex, in Tuscaloosa. Before we look ahead, though, let's look back at the 2023 season. As again, we count down the days to kickoff. We're breaking down all things Alabama Crimson Tide going into 2024. But looking back at the 2023 season, that was, Alex, little did we know the final year of Nick Saban at Alabama, a 12-2 overall record, 8-0 in SEC play. SEC champions. That doesn't even really tell the full story either, Alex, when you think about the way the season went, the early season struggles, the loss to Texas. Who can forget the South Florida game? And there were folks out there thinking Bama was going to go 8-4, 9-3. All they do is win the SEC, make it all the way to the college football playoff. They do lose to Michigan in the college football playoff semifinals. But just looking back at the 2023 season, I know, Alex, it'll be remembered for the retirement of Nick Saban, but how do fans of the Crimson Tide look back on that 2023 season?
I think pretty fondly. I know it comes up short, and there's a lot of angst over that final play of the Rose Bowl and what might have been if only the snap was clean and Jalen Milroe looks to his left and sees Roydale Williams wide open, and maybe he skirts right into the end zone. But you have to take a step back, and I think everybody has and understood that it was a deeply flawed team. It was a team coming out of the Texas game and the South Florida game after that, to use Nick Saban parlance, they had him dead and buried and gone. Like, they thought it was over, not just that season, but writing off the dynasty, it felt like. And that happened a few times during the course of Nick Saban's tenure, and it proved that each time it was wrong. And it was one of the better coaching jobs I saw in 13 seasons of watching Nick Saban up close, because it was a flawed team, because it was a quarterback who was learning on the job, because it was inconsistent receivers, because it was an inconsistent running game, an offensive line that gave up way too many sacks, and a defense that went up and down. It wasn't a perfect team, and somehow they fought through it to the point that not only do they get to an SEC championship, they beat Georgia in a game that I don't think many people expected that to happen. So, all in all, just making the playoff, I think, is going to be remembered as a very positive thing. It will be seen as Nick Saban's final year, but I think in a way, without winning a national championship, in a way, he went out at the peak of his powers.
Now, Alex, like you mentioned, a new era begins. Kalen DeBoer takes over, and we were talking off air just about how much is different in Tuscaloosa these days. Before we get into, because I want to get your take on, the feelings of the fan base, obviously, as Coach DeBoer comes in his first season. But, you mentioned just how much differently things are. We got music at practice. We got folks on their balconies of their apartments watching practice. You mentioned you're getting more access. Like, give people an idea, shed some light, because I know for the fans, obviously, for Alabama football in general, it's different. But, I mean, for everyone, including the media, like these are unprecedented times in Tuscaloosa right now.
Yeah. I mean, you walk through doors now and you aren't hit with cattle prod. You get to go into practice and actually watch 20 minutes. You get to talk to assistant coaches. You get to talk to more players. It's just a looser feel. And it's not just with the media. You hear it from players as well. There's a more, it's not run quite so much as militaristically, maybe is the way of putting it. And it's not to denigrate what Nick Saban was doing. Nobody's foolish enough to do that. It was the GOAT. I mean, it worked. But it's a different vibe, and I think players have been responsive to it because of that change, because of the communication that exists between the staff, and especially with Kalen DeBoer at the top. It's just an overall vibe shift. I don't think anyone's ready to say better or worse, but it is sort of refreshing when you're talking about X number of years that Nick Saban's there, and it was always so tightly controlled. You can breathe a little bit now.
So speaking on Coach DeBoer in regards to the fan base, Alex, I'm curious to get your takes in regards to, because normally when we do these team previews, I'm asking folks, hey, what's the vibe of your coach, in regards to scale of 1 to 10, hot seat or confidence level, whatever. Well, Kalen DeBoer obviously hasn't coached a game, but there is immense pressure. So, I mean, from what you gauge from the fan base, is there a supreme level of confidence in in Kalen DeBoer in regards to he was the right hire and the right guy to keep this thing going? Is there some worry? Because you mentioned change. As we all know, change is not always embraced. A lot of times it's met with resistance.
Yeah, I've been actually a little surprised with how open arms Alabama fans have been, and there's a couple reasons for that. And I think the first one is it starts with knowing that Nick Saban, while he did not necessarily bless the hire or anything like that, he was around, and it was a guy who Nick Saban tried to hire people from Kalen DeBoer's staff in previous iterations. So there was an understanding that if Nick is okay with this, we should be okay with it too. And then you get to know him, Kalen DeBoer. You get to see the record of what it was, 114 and 12 or whatever it is. I'm probably selling him short. His number of losses is minuscule, and winning at every level, and just understanding that there was not a perfect hire out there. There was no slam dunk, seamless transition kind of hire, but this was, I think, by far the best in terms of resume. And then he's backed it up with his actions, right? And no, he hasn't played a single football game, but the biggest question everybody had was, can he recruit? Well, they're sitting number 2 in 247's recruiting rankings right now. That said, I think there is probably a section of the fan base that is going to be a little bit wait and see, is going to want to see what it looks like having an offensive oriented coach, and is going to want to see that recruiting piece play out, because there have been a couple flips. There have been some like, okay, why aren't we recruiting in state like we used to? I think there's a method to the way Kalen DeBoer and his staff have done this. I don't really knock them for it, but those questions linger. And until they go out and play a full season, until they have the first hiccup and have to get back from it, I think there's going to be a part of the fan base that is cautiously optimistic more than just outright, we're going to let the world on fire.
So, Alex, diving into this 2024 team, we'll start on the offensive side of the football. Obviously, Nick Sheridan stepping in as offensive coordinator. That was going to be Ryan Grubb. Obviously, he departs for the NFL. Nick Sheridan, the OC, to essentially run Kalen DeBoer's offense. This is his offense, but Sheridan there is the OC. Jalen Milroe back as one of the top quarterbacks in college football, accompanied by Justice Haynes, who looks to be the leader in the backfield. Ryan Williams, a really promising five-star, a guy we've heard a lot about already to this point during fall camp. Jeremy Bernard comes in from Washington as well on the outside. You got the speedster Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, they're back. You got a pair of veteran tight ends that return. And then there's the offensive line, like you mentioned, Alex, which I guess the good news is it cannot be as bad as it was a season ago. You get a boost there up front. Parker Brailsford, the center, comes in. Obviously, that was a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line at Washington. So with all that being said, what are you expecting from the offense in year one in Kalen DeBoer? How much differently do you think it will look? And how much of the success really does just come back to that offensive line playing better?
Yeah, they have to be better. I mean, they were terrible last season. They were not. They could win individual battles. I mean, J.C. Latham went in the first round for a reason. They had talent there, but they just weren't cohesive. I do think they were a little oversized, frankly. I don't know if it was the first game or what. There was a graphic that their offensive line weight average was higher than the average offensive line weight average of the NFL. That's how big they were. So you're going to see a slimmed down offensive line, not like they're all on Weight Watchers and they're going to be ballerinas out there. But Tyler Booker's dropped some weight. Caden Proctor's dropped some weight. Parker Brailsford is a more nimble center because of what they're going to be asked to do in terms of pulling and being a little bit more active of an offensive line. The front of the offensive line, I really like. I mean, Caden Proctor had a sour end to last season with the Rose Bowl performance, but you got to remember he tore his ligament a couple of weeks earlier in the SEC championship game. He's the highest graded offensive lineman in that game. He really came on late and really solidified being a freshman All-American. So you have a freshman All-American left tackle, a freshman All-American at center, and then you've got two guards in Tyler Booker, who's a possible first-round pick, Jaden Roberts, who might be the strongest guy on the team, if not one of the strongest in the SEC. And then your only question is, okay, what does right tackle look like? Elijah Pritchett, Wilkin Formby are kind of battling there. I expect Pritchett to be the guy, former five-star. I think they've got all the pieces there. The question to me is, how do they hold up throughout the course of the season? Is the depth there? I think the coaching and the talent will all be improved from last season.
So, Alex, let's switch sides of the football to the defensive side, because this one might even be more interesting, because this was, in my opinion, Nick Saban's baby, right? And all of a sudden, Kane Womack comes in, takes over as defensive coordinator. He brings that 4-2-5 swarm defense, also most notably wearing hoodies at practice when it's 100 degrees. But that's the energy I really would want my defensive coordinator to move with. Either way, Keenan third, Smith, they anchor the interior defensive line. There's questions on the edge in regards to pass rush. Deontay Lawson, Jihad Campbell returning at linebacker, so some really high-quality experience coming back there. And then Malachi Moore is back in the secondary, but he's essentially the only one back. Lost a ton to the draft, ton to the portal. Obviously, we know what happened with Caleb Downs. When you look at the defensive side of the football, and again, they added some other pieces for sure, but, there's high-level talent returning, a lot of questions, and a brand new scheme. And I thought what was interesting, Alex, in my research, Kane Womack, you mentioned, they've been working with Nick Saban. So it's a new scheme, but Kane Womack's been asking Coach Saban, hey, where does this guy fit into my scheme? Where does this guy fit in? Like, it's not like there's an open line of communication in regards to helping out with the defensive side while also doing his own thing. So all that being said, what are you expecting from this defense? Because it feels like the first time in a very long time, there are some real questions there.
It's like an exaggerated, I don't know. I really don't know what to think of the defense, because I like it through the middle, right? I like the depth they have at tackle. Jaheim Otis is a guy we've heard about for a long time, is another piece at defensive tackle. Inside linebacker, you mentioned Lawson and Campbell. I think they're the best duo in the SEC, if not the entire country. And then at safety, you move Malachi back to high safety. Really talented, really experienced, great leader. And then Keon Sabb, a guy who played a lot at Michigan, and this staff thinks very highly of, a special football player. So through the middle, a lot to like. It's outside linebackers, it's edge rushers, it's cornerbacks where you go, ooh, hold on a second. Like, what's it going to look like? Because there was a factory of edge rushers at Alabama. Like, it was Will Anderson left, and you think, oh, there goes the best pass rusher we've had since Derek Thomas. Well, there's Dallas Turner. Oh, there's Chris Braswell. And now they're both gone, and there's no logical handoff there. So you have a Q Robinson, you have a Quay Russo. You've got players there, but they're unproven, and you just wonder what the pass rush is going to look like. And that would be worry enough, mildly, if it wasn't for what's happening at cornerback, which is essentially starting over. You have, I believe, you can check me on this, on the two deep at cornerback, there is not a single returning snap from the SEC last year. Nobody played. I mean, it's Damani Jackson transferring in. It's Deshaun Jones transferring in from Wake Forest. It's a bunch of freshmen, and it's just trying to figure out what it's going to look like. There is talent there, no doubt. But when you talk about the back end of the defense and all that newness at cornerback, Malachi even shifting positions, Keon Sabb coming in from another place, the learning curve, it's going to be incumbent on Kane Womack, Maurice Lunglis, Colin Hitchler to try to cut down on that learning curve as much as possible. And I think in a way the schedule is favorable in that respect, because Western Kentucky, USF, Wisconsin, they're all going to throw the football. They're all going to test them in one way or another. So you maybe get a little bit of a tune-up before that Georgia game, but that Georgia game is going to be – they know how to attack you. They're balanced. And to me, that's where we're going to find out a lot about where the defense is. It's just so much new on that side of the ball that I think that the difference for me, Alabama, I believe, can be good, no doubt. Being great will be determined by how good this defense can be and how quickly they can catch on.
And, Alex, we're going to dive into the 2024 schedule in just a moment. Before we do, though, I want to show some love to special teams and ask you about some of the specialists. For the first time in a long time, Will Reichert is not kicking the football in Tuscaloosa. Instead, it is Graham Nicholson who will take over the kicking duties from Miami of Ohio. He is a transfer, of course, went 27 of 28 on his field goals in 2023. The fact he kicked that many is insane. But either way, he arrives. James Burnup returns to handle the punting duties, and Jeremy Bernard looks to give you kind of an explosive return man there. So, Alex, just your thoughts on special teams. I know at Alabama there have been some years where, it's been kind of dicey and maybe even cost you at times, but thoughts on, can special teams be a a strength of this football team.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when Alabama didn't have a good kicker, and that was before Will Reichert stepped on campus and just dominated for 5 years. He really did spoil Alabama for a long time, and as good as Graham Nicholson is, you just wonder, can you replicate that? Like, how lucky can you get as a fan base to get that guy in there? But he did beat out Will Reichert for the Lou Groza Award, so there's something there. And Burnip is an excellent punter. And whether it's Jeremy Bernard, I think he'll probably be the first look at punt return. You throw Ryan Williams in that mix. You throw Bubba Hampton in that mix. There's a bunch of guys on this team that I think can improve the return game of part of it, which has not been great the last few years. Kool-Aid McKinstry was a guy who could make people miss, but sometimes had a hard time just holding on to the football. So I think they could improve in that respect. The question you have with Graham, to bring it back full circle, is, okay, what does kickoffs look like? Because we don't pay attention to it, but it matters field position wise. And he's made all those kicks at Miami of Ohio. When you're in Bryant-Denny Stadium and the pressure's on, when you're in Camp Randall and the pressure's on, it's a very different thing. So how will he respond to the pressure piece of it? There's no reason to think he won't do well, but until you see it, I think that's a fair question.
Mm-hmm. So looking at the overall outlook, Alex, of the 2024 Crimson Tide, 11 starters return, 6 on offense, 5 on defense. Again, there are some very notable pieces, but a lot of new pieces, a lot of freshmen, a lot of new guys are going to be asked to step up and make an impact. And you mentioned the 2024 schedule. I want to take a look at that. Like you mentioned, you open up Western Kentucky, South Florida. I don't think that game against USF is going to be quite as dramatic as last year. Interesting road test week 3 at Wisconsin, Camp Randall. I think all eyes are going to see, okay, how does Kalen DeBoer's team respond to this? You mentioned the big one, the SEC opener, Georgia at home. Then you go to Vandy, South Carolina, at Tennessee. That'll be a fun one in Neyland. Missouri, at LSU, Mercer, at Oklahoma, and then, of course, the Iron Bowl against Auburn at Bryant-Denny Stadium. So when you take a look at that schedule, Alex, I know you mentioned the game against Georgia is the one that really jumps out, but anything else that jumps out to you in regards to Kalen DeBoer's first SEC slate?
Yeah, well, I know why Nick Saban felt good walking away, because his schedule's a little bit of it's a little problematic. I mean, he talked about going to Oklahoma in late November. The only good news is you don't have Auburn in Jordan-Hare, because weird things happened there to Alabama. It's not the worst schedule in the world in terms of overcoming it, but it will challenge them in multiple ways. I think the good news is you get that first 3 games that is, as far as Wisconsin has come and is going to come, I think all 3 of those first games are winnable while also being able to learn lessons within them. And then you get the bye week. Getting that bye week right before the Georgia game, I think, is going to be huge. It's just going to be managing the week in and week out. It's going to be, can you cut down on, when you go to Tennessee, those procedural penalties that have really hurt them? What does this new staff look like on the road when the pressure's on? There's questions there, right? And, you got to go to LSU. Until you've seen the new staff do it, you're going to have questions about that. It's a tough schedule, there's no doubt. But I also think the win total kind of betting odds have been around 9.5. I like them to have a chance to get to at least 10 wins, and I think that puts them in consideration in a really good spot for the college football playoffs. So difficult schedule, but also one that with the talent they have, they should be able to find a way if things fall the right way.
Alex, I feel like the 12-team playoff really could not have come at a better time for Kalen DeBoer in Alabama because of those high expectations, right? I mean, again, life after Nick Saban, that's been the question. What does it look like for Alabama football? We've heard time and time again. Heck, Kalen DeBoer was asked about it at SEC Media Days. You never want to be the guy that follows the legend. Somebody there in the big room asked him, were you advised against taking the job because of that? And I thought his answer, spot on. Football is football. He answered as best he could. But the question remains, can he meet those incredibly high expectations? And will Alabama fans have a semblance of maybe some, dare I say, patience and understanding that no matter how great he is, he nor anyone else is going to be Nick Saban. But like I mentioned, Alex, All you got to do is make a 12-team playoff, and I think most fan bases are going to be happy, especially year one of his tenure. Is it fair to say you get to 10 wins, you make a college football playoff, that'll be considered a successful season year one of Kalen DeBoer? And what do you think he needs to show and this team needs to show in year one to continue that positive momentum and have Alabama fans excited about the future of the program?
Yeah, I think the measuring stick is making the playoff. Anything you do past that is gravy. But there's going to be, if they fall short, it's going to be a lot of head scratching because I think you can make an argument that this team has flaws, especially when you talk about depth, the amount of freshmen that they're going to rely on. It's not a clean path. So if it does fall apart, I don't think it would be necessarily the worst coaching job in the world, but I don't think the fan base will respond to that very well. So I think they have to make the playoff. And I think first and foremost, the offense has to look like what they want it to look like. There's a reason you brought in an offensive minded head coach. You've liked what you've seen at Washington and what they did with Michael Penix and all those receivers. So if you fail offensively while returning Jalen Milroe, who finished sixth in the Heisman Trophy voting, people are going to look at that kind of sideways. So I think as long as the offense looks good, coherent, explosive, and the defense makes strides, I don't think they have to be Nick Saban level great this season. I think there's going to be understanding that they're in a little bit of a rebuild mode on that side of the ball. But as long as you show progress on the defensive side of the ball, I think how you look and those games that you win and lose are going to determine it. But if they get to 10, and as long as they don't lose to Auburn in some kind of horrible way, that could just undo everything. But I think 10 wins is probably the place you look.
Alex, for the long term of Kalen DeBoer, it's hard to project that far ahead because I think short term, like you mentioned, I think Bama is going to win at a high level. That's all he's ever done. You mentioned 104-12, his record as a head coach. Guy doesn't lose. For the long term, we're going to 14-team playoff. God forbid, we're probably going to go to 16 and maybe even more. Do you think that's going to be the yearly expectations, just making the playoff? Is there going to come a point, you think, where maybe it's year 2, maybe it's year 3, where it's like real high-level pressure to win the national championship? Like, I know that sounds, but for a program like Alabama, that's not an outlandish expectation because that's what Alabama has done. So I just wonder, I'm curious, and again, I know you don't necessarily have the answer, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see, does the pressure begin to mount, or what is that pressure cooker like there in Tuscaloosa? Because, you don't want to, good is the enemy of great, but you don't want to run a guy off because he's not the level of winning 6 national championships and however many year span it was, and then potentially downgrade from where you were. So I'm really fascinated to see what the coming years look like and if he's able to satisfy the fan base there, I guess.
Well, and let's consider the optics, right? If you're watching from home, odds are you might start watching College Game Day, and there's your reminder of Nick Saban every single Saturday. It's not like he's going away. Mm-hmm. That reminder of what the standard was, is, and should be, is going to be there. So the expectation, I think, every single year will be, are you in the playoff hunt? And within that, are you competing for a national championship? I don't know, every 3 years. I don't think you can go 3 years at Alabama now without winning a national championship without having some really hard questions asked. And that's understanding that the game has changed, and there's no such thing as parity throughout college football, but there is parity at the top, right? Because everybody's got money now, and you can spend it, and depth has been depleted across the country. So I think there's parity among the top 20 teams now, where there hasn't been before. But I don't think anybody wants to hear that at Alabama. They want you competing for a championship regularly. They don't want, little brother, big brother. Little brother doesn't remember the last time Big Brother's team won a national championship. That's not going to fly. So I think they are well positioned, though, to succeed. This is a very good coaching staff. They are very talented, and they have proven time and time again they know what they're doing. And again, we work with the evidence we have right now. The biggest question they had was recruiting. They are number 2 in the recruiting rankings. If they can do that and develop talent the way they have at previous stops, there should be no problem. They're not going to go to bring it full circle. It's never going to be Nick Saban, Alabama again. There's a reason, that it only happened once. And the playoff expanding is a big part of that. So it's not going to go back to the way it was, but it can still operate at a very high level.
Alex Scarborough of Bama247 does a great job of covering the Crimson Tide. Alex, let folks know exactly where they can go check out all of your great work.
Yeah, you can go find the Alabama 247 sports page. It's a great group of writers. It's not just myself. It's Mike RHOBACK. It's Cody Goodwin. It's Kirk McNair of Fountain of Knowledge. And then Brett Greenberg does a heck of a job covering the recruiting side of things. It's great. I think we got a 60% off thing going on right now. We always got a deal. So come join the fun.
Alex, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. We'll definitely do it again soon.
Absolutely.